behalf of InovaLeite team, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. When you are ready to start, please share with us your presentation, knowledge, and a lot of energy that we know. Okay, now it's time.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and thank you for asking me to do this. It's always a great pleasure to be part of the InovaLeite team. And you know, now that we have these opportunities and we're all working from home, actually the boundaries are getting smaller and smaller. So it is good, and I'm glad you guys are organizing this. I will give you a little bit of background on UHT and extended shelf life. And the reason why I wanted to talk about both is because it's very important to look at these both together, because in some ways they are quite similar, and in many things they're also different. But in both cases, basically what we're trying to do is extend shelf life of the milk. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about where I am. And I put a big arrow, and I don't know if you can see also my little arrow for the mouse, but that's where Aarhus University is. And we are located in Denmark, but we are not located in the island where Copenhagen is, which is really a small, tiny island. We are located on the peninsula where most of the agricultural activities are. And the top picture is actually our brand new food science building. It has 4 wings, and representing the main disciplines of our groups, which are raw materials. We have a greenhouse, and we have people working on high value crops, fruits and vegetables. We are looking at processing, and we have a big processing hall. We have sensory and consumer science, and we have engineering and food chemistry. So you can go and check out our website, as well as the iFood Center website that I'm leading, which is a multidisciplinary centers with many platforms that start from raw material all the way to packaging. We do lots of courses and innovation courses, and if any of you are interested, especially this year that our courses are going to be online, I would suggest that you go and look at some of the courses that we're offering. This summer we are going to be offering a 1-week boot camp on sustainable food packaging solutions, a 1-week boot camp on entrepreneurship and food for developing climate-friendly food solutions, and a summer school on transparent food chains. And this is really close to my heart, because I think that if we want to develop value-added products in the future, we will have to use digital technologies to make sure that products are guaranteed to be safe and guaranteed to be what you are actually saying that you have in the product, and it will be done somewhat through tools that are linked to the Internet of Things. But anyway, now that I've talked so much about what we do in Denmark, let me talk a little bit about the actual topic of today, which is UHT milk. And as I said, it's very, very important that we consider these kind of products in a new light, because food waste is one of the biggest problems in our food chain when it comes to sustainability and when it comes to how we impact the carbon footprint. And so we see this as a big opportunity towards improving our footprint in the planet. And we are not talking necessarily only about milk, but we're talking about all sorts of milk-like products, including non-milk products, non-dairy products that are going to be developed in the future. And as I said, where you can decrease food waste by increasing the shelf life of the products. So the outline of the presentation today will talk about some basics, just because I am the first speaker today, and I know my colleagues later on will be talking about some of the details related to how to design UHT products. So I get the honor to talk to you about heating effects on bacterial loads and protein denaturation, some differences between UHT and extended shelf life milk, and then let's talk about a little bit about the quality of UHT milk compared to lactose reduced, and what are the challenges in lactose reduced UHT milk, and final thoughts on other milk systems. So hopefully this presentation won't last more than 20 minutes, and you'll have a little bit of time for questions. So and I'm not going to go through the details of this, but just to remind everybody, if you are not a food scientist, because in food science we talk about this to death, but one reason why we use very high temperature time combinations when we look at UHT is because we are trying to increase the decimal reduction time, which is basically what is the time that is required to decrease of one log the bacteria population, and what is the temperature increment that is needed to have an increase in the decimal reduction time. So the higher the temperature, the higher will be, the lower will be your time that you require to decrease of one log the bacterial load. Of course, garbage in, garbage out. So when you have products that contain a lot of bacterial spores to start with, then of course you will have a problem in reaching the log reductions that you need, and you're going to require higher temperatures or longer times to have more log reductions. So what is the problem? Why don't we heat the heck out of milk? Is because heat treatment has an effect on protein denaturation, and in particular whey proteins. So here is a little picture of the casein micelle with the hairy layer of kappa casein and whey proteins, which are much smaller than casein, and they are globular in shape. And therefore, when you're going to temperatures higher than 74 degrees, they unfold and start interacting with one another, because they start to show hydrophobic interactions. The hydrophobic sites that were buried in the original structure are now exposed, and they start interacting with one another. And then, of course, with higher temperatures or longer times, we create all sorts of aggregates. And here is a size electron microscopy picture where you can see the casein micelles and all these little bumpy things all around. They're nothing else than your whey protein aggregates. And honestly, they completely change the behavior of the milk. So, so we have whey protein interactions, and we have a change in the surface of caseins. Now, of course, this effect will depend on time, temperature combinations. How do we measure the denaturation of a protein? Of course, we have the best way to measure the denaturation of proteins is by using HPLC. And here is a chromatography run of serum proteins, where you can see you have alpha-lactalbumin, beta-lactoglobulin, and you can even distinguish between two different variants of beta-lactoglobulin, A and B. And then, of course, when you heat the milk, anything that is denatured will precipitate a low pH. So if you prepare your sample, your milk, and you change the pH to 4.5, you precipitate all the whey proteins that are denatured, and the only thing that is left is the residual native proteins. And then you can measure the level of protein denaturation by just looking at how much is left. And of course, we're getting more and more fancy, and we can move from HPLC to mass spectroscopy, but HPLC is a perfectly good technique to look at differences in the denaturation. And this graph, which is quite old, quite old now, shows you different temperature time combination, and you can see that the level of whey protein denaturation increases with temperature and with time. The most famous graph that everybody used, and you know, I have to tell you this funny story. I actually met Mr. Dannenberg last year, and when I met him, I was having a beer with a friend at a conference. This guy comes to me and he says, "Hi, I'm Frank Dannenberg." And for a while I was like, I have heard that name before. And then I realized he was the Dannenberg of Dannenberg and Kessler. This paper is one of the most famous papers in food science, in dairy science, because they basically measured the amount of protein at various temperature and time combinations. And from this graph, if you actually looked at the protein denaturation, you can actually derive what was the temperature history of your product. You can go back and forth. So you can look at protein denaturation and you can look at temperature history, because it is foolproof. It has been shown so many times, and this is why it's one of the most, the oldest and most cited graphs that one can think of. And if you are a researcher, you should always remember that you should plot your data, because when you plot your data, sometimes people will use your graphs over and over again. You make a table is boring, and nobody's ever going to cite your table. But a graph, everybody will remember it. So as you can see here, beta-lactoglobulin actually has a break in the kinetic. So this is kind of cool, because it shows you that if you're going at low temperatures, beta-lactoglobulin denatures at a different speed, a different rate than at higher temperatures. And of course, you can do this for different kinds of heating, like plate heat exchangers and different time combination, and look at if direct steam injection or indirect steam injection has an impact, and determine all sorts of curves to see if in one case your system is better than others. Why would we care so much about whey protein denaturation? And if we were in a normal class now, I would stop and ask you, why do you think that whey protein denaturation is so important? It's because this is one of the nutritional parameters we're looking at. We want high nutritional properties for milk, and we don't want whey protein denaturation. Another aspect of modifications that occur during heating, and especially during UHT, is the oxidation of Amadori products, which create Maillard reactions, which you guys love in dulce de leche, but they're not so interesting for milk systems, because depending, of course, on culture and what you're used to, Europeans do not like very cooked milk, while you guys in Brazil are more familiar with the flavor that come from caramelized products, and which actually they are very good and nice and sweet, but depending on where you live, some of these products are more or less interesting, because of course you can really feel and taste the cooked flavor of advanced Maillard reactions. So just to summarize UHT milk, you can usually use high temperature and short times, because you want microbial log reductions. You also want to inactivate most of the enzymes, even if you do not inactivate all the enzymes. And you can do it by indirect heat or direct steam injection. And more recently, also with a new system that is called an infusion, where you can basically infuse the steam instead of injecting it from a nozzle. Some of the proteases survive this process, And this could be a problem when you want a very long shelf life in your products. And we will talk about it when we talk about the defects. And of course, we just talked about non-enzymatic reactions and denaturations and oxidative processes. Normally, the shelf life of UHT milk is more than 6 months, between 6 and 10 months, depending on where you live and what is the sensitivity of your consumer. And it is less for lactose-free milk. And this is why I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about lactose-free milk. We aim with UHT to have commercial sterility, which is the requirement for commercial sterility is a least 9 log reduction of thermophilic spore counts. So usually the temperature time combination is at least 135 degrees for 10.1 seconds. So here is a graph that I actually stole from the Tetra Pak website, where you can see the difference in kinetic of heating and cooling of milk, depending on if you're looking at a direct steam injection or indirect. So you're getting into the temperature zone you require to do UHT in a much faster way by directly steaming. And then you have this temperature curve underneath is actually the history of the product. One important point of UHT is that UHT is fine, the treatment itself is fine, but if you do not have a very controlled chain where you control the post-contamination, post-treatment contamination with aseptic filling, and you don't sterilize the packaging material in the right way, you will not achieve commercial sterility. Because you can heat the milk, but then if you do not have filters on your machines and you don't have sterile systems to fill, then of course you will break this chain. So it's very, very important that we remember UHT milk also has this part of the process, which we kind of almost never talk about, which is extremely important. And that requires the sterilization of the packaging material, a filling that is basically with no failures. Okay, so what's the difference between UHT and extended shelf life? And this is a little bit confusing because extended shelf life milk really is what we say it is, which is a pasteurized milk that is extended in shelf life, and usually is at least 30, even 40 days, and in some countries even longer than 40 days of shelf life. This is becoming a very popular product because of the fact that we are starting to be warehouse-driven societies where supply chain is extremely important and the milk does not go from the factory to the store within 2 days. And therefore, we need a long shelf life. But an extended shelf life product doesn't necessarily have, it's not regulated the same way as a UHT milk would be. It is, obviously you need a cold chain. It is somewhat in between pasteurization and UHT in the way you treat it. And so the best thing that I can do to explain it to you is to show this this graph from a very recent paper, where basically they are using the time temperature curves to show you the kinetics of denaturation of proteins and normal UHT, inactivation of psychotrophic bacteria, inactivation of thermophilic bacteria, and it's very clear that basically what they're trying to do is to use zones where you have commercial sterility, but you are below a 50% denaturation of beta-lactoglobulin. And with extended shelf life milk, what you're really trying to do is not to achieve commercial sterility, but to achieve denaturation of most of the vegetative and spores that are of psychotrophic bacteria. Thankfully, psychotropic bacteria are a little bit less thermoduric than the other spores, so it is possible to kill them at a bit lower temperatures, and in that way we can eliminate B. cereus and other psychotrophs that are the ones that could grow when you're keeping the milk at 7 degrees of temperature. And so you can have all sorts of ways to do this, and I listed some here. You can have temperature of treatment between 90 and 145 degrees. In the US, actually, there is a regulation that talks about ultra-pasteurization, and ultra-pasteurization is 138 degrees for 2 seconds. You can do it by indirect or direct heating, and in some cases, microfiltration is also used. With microfiltration, you can do this. You can keep the spores on one side and filter the milk. This would decrease the thermal stress that you have to give to the product and still achieve the number of reductions that you want, which is normally about 6 logs instead of 9 logs. Okay, so just a few more slides to show you some of the defects. Here you have age gelation. Age gelation is the formation of a sediment in UHT milk, and this.
Oi.
Yes, you have. Anybody has a question? Okay. So what I'm showing to you here is the microstructure of caseins that have gelled in a sediment in a UHT system. And you can see that basically over time, the caseins and the whey proteins are kind of interacting, they're forming these networks, and the caseins have fused with one another. In a very recent paper that is a review of UHT milk and sedimentation levels, you can see here that there is a difference between having indirect and direct heating, where there is a lot less sedimentation occurring in direct heating. So obviously there are a lot of theories on what is the mechanisms related to this, and it's becoming a big of an issue if you are using UHT temperatures and time combinations that are very high and you want your milk to last more than 3-4 months, because you can have some of these sedimentation effects which are caused by enzymatic levels that are left over in the milk, so proteases, as well as whey protein aggregation and denaturation. Okay, lactose-free versus conventional milk. I think you know that we do treat the milk with beta-galactosidases to break down the lactose to galactose and glucose, and this is not necessarily done only because of the fact that people may be sensitive to lactose, but it's becoming, especially here in the northern countries of Europe, it's becoming a very popular product because it's also reduced in sugar. And the reason why it's reduced in sugar is because we do not just add the lactase to the milk, but we first filter the milk and take out some of the lactose and then add the lactase. Therefore, the product is sweeter because there is a sweetness level of the sugars that is higher when the sugars are broken, but at the same time, the total amount of sugar is lower. So actually, as I said, it's becoming a popular product also because of the fact that the total sugar in the nutritional label is decreased. We already talked about the Maillard reactions and the fact that you can quantify the Maillard reactions by looking at the level of furosine, which is one of the intermediate of the Maillard reaction. And and I have cited this paper here. You can see if you want to see more details on it. And this is a very interesting graph because it shows you the amount of furosine in different kinds of milk. You have a conventional milk and 2 lactose-free milk treated with either indirect UHT or conventional. So now look at the difference here. At the beginning, you have a higher level of furazine in the conventional UHT milk. But what is very interesting is that no matter if you're using direct or indirect heating, after 100 days of storage, you actually have a higher level of furazine in the lactose-free milk. Of course, at the beginning is lower because you have less, as I said, you have a less sugar, less reducing sugar in general because you've eliminated some of them. But later on, you have a higher level. And this is one of the biggest reasons why lactose-free milk is less stable than UHT conventional milk. Of course, if instead of doing what I just explained here, you're just adding lactase to the normal milk, you would also start with higher levels, and then your curve would not start here, it would start here and go higher. Okay, so one last final comment on other milk matrices. Of course, we have only talked about milk, which by definition has a certain solids level and a certain amount of proteins. Now, what happens if you're starting to play with all sorts of other products which contain much higher levels of proteins? Well, then you're in real trouble, because depending on the history of your product and the history of your ingredient, here you have microfiltered 4 times concentrated milk, UF milk, you have 2 times concentrated milk, and these are without even having to deal with different MPC isolates and concentrates and resuspending. These are all fresh milks. The viscosity of these systems is completely different depending on the history of the ingredient. So don't get fooled. If you have to do this kind of, you have to develop this kind of products, the history of your ingredients has a huge impact on the functionality of your final protein shake. And with that, I hope that I didn't go over time. Sorry, it's very hard to do when you're just basically talking to your screen and you're getting excited about stuff. I just wanted to show you that looking ahead, of course, we know a lot about how to do these UHT products, but of course, as we continue to develop different high protein products, we will continue to have challenges. And first, we have to deal with micro issues, and by micro issues, I mean sedimentation, and really bad taste. But if you are getting really good in doing that, then you can start looking at your post-transactional modifications. You don't want lactosylation in these products, and you don't want to decrease the nutritional bioavailability, especially if these are products that you want to sell to the nutritional market. And then some open questions that I struggle with in my research. How does the structure of the aggregates that you form impact the bioactivity of the peptides that you digest? And how does denaturation affect the protein digestibility and the amino acid bioavailability?
Okay, Milena, thank you very much.